So followed a day of much slaying between the two sides. And for a long time, no one knew to which side to give the victory. So furious was the battle, and so great the killing. So wrote a contemporary 15th century chronicler. The Battle of Towton, on Palm Sunday, March the 29th, 1461, was one of the largest ever fought on English soil, and almost certainly the bloodiest. It left a scar that took generations to heal. The legend of Towton is left to us by the chroniclers. Some 60,000 men from the rival houses of York and Lancaster fought there. It was the culmination of years of dynastic conflict for the English throne, known as the Wars of the Roses. The bitter hand-to-hand fighting lasted many hours in freezing conditions until the Yorkists won a crushing victory. As night fell, 28,000 men lay dead or dying.
It meant a lot to Richard III because his brother was made king here. Now this was the place where the Yorkist dynasty formulated all their ideas and their hopes and wishes and became the kings of England. They were the Edward IV, Richard III, and so this place was everything to them.
On becoming king, Richard immediately set about commemorating the sacrifice of the Yorkist soldiers.
Richard wanted to put this in stone. He wanted to build a memorial chapel, and in the village of Towton he did that. He raised this lovely, apparently gorgeous chapel, very sumptuous it's said.
Yet of this sumptuous chapel, it seems there's now no trace. It's one of the greatest riddles of the whole Towton story.
One of the remaining mysteries about the Battle of Towton is connected with the memorial chapel. The trouble is, we don't know where it is. For such a grand structure that meant so much to the Yorkist dynasty, how can it disappear completely? And that's one of the things we needed to find out. Where had the chapel gone to?
Archaeologist Tim Sutherland is determined to solve this centuries-old mystery. There were approximately 50 skeletons in the grave, each one a snapshot of life from half a millennium ago. Time was limited. There were just 5 days in which to carry out an excavation. A team of archaeologists from the University of Bradford was called in, including Tim Sutherland.
Those skeletons really brought home what a rough life it was. You could see by the physique of the people, they were really robust people. They were very strong, and of course you had to be. They were working on the land. They were doing physical, hard manual labour a lot of the time. They were tough people compared to us. These people had been killed fighting or had been caught up in a fight, so they had evidence of extensive trauma, head wounds and wounds to the body. The weapons, the arrowheads, for example, still exist and still lie in the soil.
Simon had already spent many years developing his skill on all kinds of sites, including medieval battlefields.
If you're on a medieval site, you never quite know what's going to come up next. And it can be absolutely thrilling.
Over the years, Simon has found a wide array of artefacts from Towton, each one carefully GPS logged. From the recorded positions of the artefacts, Tim has been able to build up a detailed plot of exactly where the main contact areas were during the battle. It was the first survey of its kind in Europe, and it enabled Tim to interpret the events of that day in 1461.
It's difficult for us to imagine what a medieval battle was like. We're quite soft in the great scheme of things. We do not attack each other with big clubs or with big machete type implements. And so of course we grew up with a very safe feeling. But in the medieval period it was different. Medieval battles were relatively common, or medieval conflict was at least. So you've got the formal Lancastrian army here, lined up behind us here. We've got the formal Yorkist army lined up on that ridge. The Yorkists slowly move forward, but in line.
The battle began, with both sides unleashing thousands of arrows.
Because the wind is in the Yorkist favour, when the Yorkists lose their arrows, they go further and actually manage to hit the Lancastrian soldiers. The Lancastrians loose their arrows, and because the wind's against them, all their arrows fall short. It's quite a major tactical achievement. If you can get your enemy to move away from their standing position, they're almost certainly going to lose.
Yet careful recording of each individual bone meant this could be disproved.
This myth that had been created about this possible prisoner could be dispelled by the fact that we closely analysed the skeletons and we realised actually we'd recorded one arm twice. And one of the arms of this individual that looked as if he'd had the arms tied behind his back, one of those arms actually belonged to somebody else and had therefore been recorded twice. So that myth was completely destroyed.
Analysis showed, though, that almost every skeleton carried some evidence of violent injury, the grim reality of the medieval age of chivalry.
The general opinion was that the Battle of Towton, and probably all medieval battles, were actually quite chivalrous, and that they were very honourable and quite romantic in a way. It was quite shocking to a lot of people, the sort of gory facts that were revealed through our analysis, that this wasn't chivalrous at all. It was a really bloody battle, that people probably had that red mist effect where they couldn't exactly control what they were doing anymore. They weren't in charge exactly of what they were doing. It was just hacking around one another.
The 4 skeletons removed from beneath the dining room of Towton Hall showed the signs of a hard life spent soldiering.
Most of the individuals who we've analysed from the Battle of Towton were aged usually between sort of 18 and 45. This individual here was buried in a grave on his own. He's aged 36 to 45. What is obvious is that this person was quite fit and muscular as well. This individual has got 6 skull injuries. Some of them as minor as this superficial stab wound, but there's also, if you can see here, a triangular cross-section of a much more deep, penetrating stab wound. And then a large cut here, which you can see has entered this area. And all of these have caused fracture lines that are emanating from them. If you turn the skull around, you can see that there's another stab wound here and another cut wound here in this area. So this person had a blow to the left side of the skull, probably 3 stab wounds to the back of the skull, and 1, 2 large cuts to the back and side of the skull as well.
Some of the trauma marks are small and easily missed, but with careful analysis, it's possible for Marlin to interpret how they came about.
So there are actually 2 parallel cuts into this pelvis. We've got a little mark here on the inside of the pelvis, and if we turn this bone over, we can see that there was probably a blade or perhaps even an arrow that went into the left side of the hip and penetrated the bone.
More than one of the skeletons has unusual blade trauma to the jaw. This led again to interpretations that the men had been executed or finished off by having their throats cut.
So this individual has actually also got a cut there on the jaw in exactly the same place as the previous skeleton, but a much deeper cut that's actually come from the sort of front and the side, and then bone has splintered off upwards and downwards on the lower jaw.
It's difficult to know how exactly this came about. There were many ways to get injured in a medieval battle.
The other trauma this individual suffered is not as obvious as in the first skeleton, but he actually has just this area here which is affected, caused by a blunt instrument, and therefore just the impact through head protection.
One of the skulls carries an injury that was evident straight away as it was excavated. It's one of the most horrendous found on all the Towton skeletons.
This injury here was noted immediately on site during excavation when his skull was exposed. It's a cut that's come from above and the left-hand side of this individual, and it actually ends here, so it was probably the tip of a sword which severed this person's lip and maxillary bone here, and also his teeth. I think it must have come from the left side and above